The text message from Mom felt like a punch to the gut. "We need to talk. Family meeting tonight. Important news about the house. I'm Zoe." And that message marked the beginning of the end of everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. Standing in my childhood home's kitchen 12 hours later, I wished I'd never shown up. "We're selling the house," Dad announced, his voice steady as if he were discussing the weather. "Caesar has an amazing business opportunity, and we're going to help him make it happen." The wooden spoon I'd been clutching, the same one I'd used to help Mom bake countless birthday cakes, clattered to the floor. "You're what?" Caesar leaned against the doorframe, that familiar smirk playing on his lips. "It's a game changer, sis. Premium coffee shops across the city. We're talking artisanal blends, prime locations." "Stop," I held up my hand. "You're selling our home, the house we grew up in, for coffee shops?" Mom stepped forward, her hands twisting her wedding ring like she always did when nervous. "Honey, we've discussed this thoroughly. Caesar has a solid business plan." "Solid?" I laughed, but it came out more like a sob. "Like the food truck venture last year? Or the cryptocurrency investment that emptied his savings?" "That's not fair," Caesar pushed off the doorframe. "This is different. I've got investors lined up." "Who? The same guys who convinced you to sink 20 grand into that bogus real estate scheme?" "Zoe," Dad's voice carried that warning tone I remembered from childhood. "Your brother has matured. We believe in his vision." I turned to the window, staring at the maple tree I'd climbed countless times. The treehouse Dad built us still clung to its branches, weathered but standing. "What about my room, my dark room? All those photographs I've been storing here?" "We'll help you move everything," Mom offered quickly. "You can store them at your apartment." "My apartment that's barely big enough for me?" I spun around. "This house isn't just property, it's our history. The marks on the wall showing how tall we grew, the dent in the living room where Caesar crashed his skateboard, the garden where we buried Rusty." "It's just a house," Caesar said dismissively. "We need to think about the future, not cling to the past." Something snapped inside me. Just a house? This is where we learned to ride bikes, where we had every Christmas morning, where we held each other after Grandma died. But sure, let's trade all that for your latest get-rich-quick scheme. "Zoe," Mom reached for my arm, but I pulled away. "How much?" I demanded. "How much are you selling it for?" Dad cleared his throat. "The offer is $450. "I'll buy it," I said instantly. "I have savings. I can get a loan." "We've already accepted their offer," Dad cut me off. "The papers are signed." The room spun slightly. "You didn't even give me a chance? Your own daughter?" "Honey," Mom's voice cracked. "We didn't think—" "No, you didn't think. Not about me, anyway." I grabbed my purse from the counter. "When do the new owners take possession?" 30 days, Dad answered quietly. I nodded, fighting back tears. Perfect. Just enough time to watch another piece of my life get sacrificed for Caesar's dreams. "Don't be dramatic," Caesar rolled his eyes. "I'll make it up to you. When the business takes off—" "Save it," I snapped. "I don't want your promises or your overpriced coffee. I want my home." "Zoe, please," Mom called as I headed for the door. "Don't leave like this." I paused at the threshold, my hand on the doorknob. "You know what hurts the most? You didn't even ask me. Didn't consider how this would affect me. It's always been about Caesar, his needs, his dreams, his mistakes. Well, congratulations. You finally managed to sell the last piece of my childhood to fund another one of his fantasies." "That's not fair," Caesar protested. "Life's not fair," I replied, meeting his eyes. "But don't worry, big brother. I'm sure this time will be different. This time your brilliant plan will work out perfectly. And if it doesn't, well, there's always Mom and Dad's retirement fund to fall back on, right?" I walked out before they could respond, slamming the door behind me. In my car, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, fighting the urge to scream or cry or both. Through the windshield, I could see the house next door, old Mrs. Patterson's place. The for sale sign had gone up last week. An idea began to form in my mind. Maybe I couldn't save my childhood home, but I could do something else. something that would make them all understand exactly what they'd thrown away. I pulled out my phone and dialed my realtor's number. "Hey, Sarah, remember that property we discussed? The Patterson house? I want to make an offer. Today." "You did what?" Autumn nearly choked on her wine. We were sitting on my tiny apartment balcony, the evening air thick with summer heat and the weight of my decision. "I bought Mrs. Patterson's house," I repeated, swirling the red wine in my glass. "The offer was accepted this morning." "Okay." Autumn set her glass down carefully. "And you're planning to turn it into a women's retreat center? Just like that?" "Why not? It's perfect. 5 bedrooms, huge garden, that amazing sunroom." I leaned forward. "Plus, it's right next door to my family's house. Every time Caesar looks out his precious coffee shop window, he'll see what I built from scratch." "Girl," Autumn's eyes widened. "That's either brilliant or crazy, maybe both." My phone buzzed, another message from Mom. I ignored it, like I had the previous dozen. "You should see the property," I continued. "I'm meeting the inspector tomorrow. Want to come?" "Obviously. Someone needs to make sure you don't completely lose your mind." She paused. "Have you actually run the numbers on this?" I pulled out my laptop. "I've been working on nothing else for the past week. Look." As I showed her the spreadsheets, business plan, and market research, Autumn's skepticism slowly transformed into interest. "There's nothing like this in the area," I explained. "Women need a place to reset, to heal, to figure out their next steps. I can offer workshops, temporary housing, counseling services. Using your photography studio space," Autumn finished, catching on. "Art therapy." "Exactly." I closed the laptop. "I've already talked to 3 potential investors. They love the concept." The sliding door creaked open, and my neighbor Rachel poked her head out. "Sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't help overhearing. Are you really starting a women's retreat?" "That's the plan." Rachel stepped onto the balcony. "My sister could have used something like that last year when she was going through her divorce. She ended up sleeping on my couch for 3 months because she had nowhere else to go." "See?" I gestured to Rachel. "This is exactly why—" My phone buzzed again, this time with Caesar's name flashing on the screen. I declined the call. "You'll have to talk to them eventually," Autumn said gently. "No, I really don't." I stood up and walked to the railing. "They made their choice. Now I'm making mine." Rachel cleared her throat. "Well, if you need any help with the retreat, I'm a licensed social worker. I'd love to be involved." I turned back, surprised. "Really?" "Absolutely. I can help set up support programs, maybe run some group sessions." The next morning, Autumn and I met the inspector at Mrs. Patterson's house. Standing in the grand entryway, with sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows, I felt a surge of certainty. "The bones are good," the inspector said, tapping the walls. "You'll need to update the electrical in the east wing, and the roof needs work, but overall—" A familiar voice cut through from outside. "Zoe, what are you doing here?" Caesar stood on the sidewalk, coffee cup in hand, staring up at the house. "Buying property," I called back. "Isn't that what our family does now?" He jogged up the front steps. "Come on, sis, don't be like this. Let's talk." "About what?" "How you convinced Mom and Dad to sell my childhood home for your latest scheme?" "It's not a scheme. I've got everything planned out. Look." He reached for his phone. "Save your pitch deck," I cut him off. "I'm busy with my own business plan." His eyes narrowed. "What business plan?" "You'll see soon enough." I turned to the inspector. "Shall we continue the tour?" "Zoe," Caesar grabbed my arm. "What are you up to?" I yanked free. "Creating something meaningful, something that actually helps people. But I wouldn't expect you to understand that concept." Autumn stepped between us. "I think you should leave, Caesar." He backed away, hands raised. "Fine, but this isn't over." "No," I agreed, watching him retreat down the walkway. "It's just beginning." Back inside, Autumn whistled low. "Well, that was intense." "Good," I said, running my hand along the vintage wallpaper. "I want him to worry. I want them all to see what they threw away." "Just remember," Autumn cautioned, "the best revenge is living well." I smiled, already envisioning the transformation this house would undergo. Trust me, I plan to live extremely well, and I'm going to help other women do the same. The inspector cleared his throat. Shall we check out the second floor? As we climbed the grand staircase, I could feel the house's potential humming through my fingers on the banister. This wasn't just about getting back at my family anymore. This was about creating something bigger than myself, something lasting. And if it happened to make Caesar and my parents uncomfortable in the process, well, that was just karma doing its work. The contractor just quit. I slumped onto a dust-covered chair in what would eventually be the retreat's main office. Said the electrical work is more complicated than he thought? Rachel looked up from the stack of permit applications spread across the floor. That's the third one this month. I know. I rubbed my temples, trying to ward off an approaching headache. The renovation was already 2 weeks behind schedule, and my savings were draining faster than expected. A knock on the front door echoed through the empty house. "We're closed," I called out, not in the mood for another nosy neighbor asking about construction noise. "I saw your sign outside," a voice responded. "About the women's retreat?" Rachel and I exchanged glances. I hadn't put up any sign yet. Curious, I walked to the door. A young woman stood on the porch, hugging herself despite the warm weather. Her eye makeup was smudged, and she carried a small duffel bag. "I'm Gemma," she said quickly, as if afraid I'd shut the door. "I know you're not open yet, but I saw the workers here, and I just really need a place to stay." "We're still under construction," I explained. "Nothing's ready. Please." Her voice cracked. "I can't go back to my apartment. He'll be waiting." The desperation in her eyes hit me like a physical force. I recognized that look, the same one I'd seen in the mirror countless times after my family's betrayal, but deeper, more urgent. "Come in," I heard myself say. "The kitchen's somewhat functional. We can at least make coffee." 20 minutes later, Gemma sat at our makeshift break table, hands wrapped around a steaming mug. "I left this morning while he was at work. 3 years of—" She trailed off. "I just couldn't do it anymore." Rachel, in full social worker mode, was already making calls to domestic violence shelters. I watched Gemma's hands trembling around the mug and made a decision. "The West Wing bedroom is finished," I said. "It's basic, but it has a bed and a working bathroom. You can stay there while we figure things out." Rachel shot me a warning look. "Zoe, we don't have the proper permits yet. Then we'll get them faster." I turned back to Gemma. No one should have to go back to a place that doesn't feel safe. Later that evening, as I was sorting through construction quotes, I heard voices outside. Through the window, I saw Caesar talking to one of the remaining contractors in the driveway. I stormed out. "What do you think you're doing?" Caesar spun around, all innocent smiles. "Just asking about the renovation timeline, trying to plan the coffee shop opening, you know? By interfering with my contractors?" "Interfering? I'm networking, sis. That's what successful business people do." "Get off my property." "Your property?" He laughed. "This whole thing is a joke. You don't know the first thing about running a business." "No?" I stepped closer. "At least I'm not burning through our parents' retirement fund on overpriced coffee beans." His smile faltered. "That's not—" "Leave. Now. And stop harassing my contractors." After he left, the contractor approached me awkwardly. "Look, maybe this job is more than we can handle. I'll pay you 15% above your quote," I said quickly. "Just please don't quit." He hesitated, then nodded. "Deal. But your brother mentioned some potential zoning issues." "I'll handle the zoning." I was already dialing Rachel's number as I walked back inside. I found Gemma in the kitchen, organizing our meager supply of dishes. "You don't have to do that," I said. "I want to help." She placed a mug in the cabinet. "This place, what you're doing here, it matters?" "My brother doesn't think so." I saw him outside. Gemma's voice hardened. "Men like that, they can't stand seeing women build something without them." I looked at her sharply. "You heard our conversation?" She nodded. "Reminded me of my ex. Always trying to tear down anything I was proud of." Something clicked in my mind. "Would you be interested in a job?" We need someone to coordinate with contractors, manage supplies. Really? Her eyes lit up. But I don't have experience. You have perspective. That's worth more. That night, reviewing budget spreadsheets in my apartment, I realized Gemma's arrival had shifted something. This wasn't just about getting back at my family anymore. It was about creating a space where women like Gemma could rebuild their lives. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Please call us. We're worried about you." I typed back, "Don't be. I'm finally building something that matters." Then I turned back to my spreadsheets, determination renewed. Let Caesar try his sabotage. He had no idea how strong women could be when they stood together. "There's a zoning board meeting tomorrow," Mom announced, appearing at my construction site unannounced. "Your father and I will be there to support Caesar's permit application." I kept hammering, pretending the nail I was driving into the new bookshelf was my frustration. "Of course you will." "Zoe, please. This feud has to end." She stepped closer, dodging a pile of lumber. "We're still family." "Family?" The hammer slipped, nearly catching my thumb. "Is that what you call selling my childhood home without even consulting me?" "The coffee shop will be amazing. Caesar's really thought it through this time." "Mrs. Foster?" Gemma appeared in the doorway. "The inspector's here for the electrical certification." Mom's eyes narrowed. "You already have people staying here? Without proper permits?" "She works here," I said firmly, "and our permits are in order." "Are they?" She pulled out her phone. "Because Caesar mentioned some concerns about—" "Stop." I set the hammer down hard. "Just stop. Caesar's concerns are nothing but attempts to sabotage my project because he's worried about competition." "Competition? This is a women's shelter." "It's a retreat center," I corrected. "And yes, competition. Because while he's selling overpriced lattes, I'll be actually helping people rebuild their lives." The inspector appeared behind Gemma, clipboard in hand. Mom took the hint and left, but not before saying, "We'll see you at the zoning meeting." The next day, I sat in the municipal building's stuffy meeting room, watching Caesar charm the zoning board with his polished presentation about revitalizing the neighborhood with his artisanal coffee empire. And as you can see, he gestured to his slides, the property's current residential zoning classification would be better served by converting to commercial use. I gripped my folder tighter, waiting for my turn. Mom and Dad sat in the front row, beaming at their golden boy. Finally, the board chairman called my name. I walked to the podium, spreading out my documentation. "Board members, I'm here to oppose the rezoning application and present my own proposal for the adjacent property." I met Caesar's startled gaze. "The neighborhood doesn't need another coffee shop. It needs a safe space for women in crisis." I detailed our plans: counseling services, temporary housing, job training programs. With each point, I saw the board members' interest grow. "Furthermore," I continued, "we've already secured partnerships with local mental health providers and employment agencies." "Excuse me," Caesar interrupted, "but my sister's project lacks proper licensing for residential facilities." "Actually," I pulled out a document, "we received our provisional license yesterday. Unlike some businesses, we did our homework before making promises." A murmur rippled through the room. Dad's smile had disappeared. The chairman cleared his throat. "Mr. Foster, your rezoning application could impact both properties. Given the circumstances, we'll need to review." "This is ridiculous!" Caesar stood up. "She's only doing this to spite me." "Spite?" I laughed. "You really think everything revolves around you, don't you?" "Children, please." Mom started to rise. "No, Mom. Let him speak." I turned to Caesar. "Tell everyone how you convinced our parents to sell our home for your latest get-rich-quick scheme. Tell them about the contractors you tried to poach, the rumors you've been spreading about our permits." "I was protecting our family's investment." Caesar's face reddened. "This neighborhood needs upgrading, not some depressing shelter." "It's not depressing," a voice called from the back. Gemma stood up, shoulders straight. "It's hope. When I left my abusive ex, Zoe's retreat gave me a chance to start over. How many lattes can do that?" Silence fell over the room. The chairman cleared his throat again. "Given the complexity of these proposals, we'll need time to review both applications." Meeting adjourned. Outside, Dad caught up to me. Zoe, this vendetta has gone too far. Vendetta? I shook my head. Look around, Dad. See those women? I pointed to where Gemma stood with two other retreat residents. They're why I'm doing this. Not everything is about Caesar. But the family made its choice. I stepped back. Now I'm making mine. And unlike Caesar's coffee shop dreams, I'm actually helping people. Mom appeared at his side. Honey, please. Save it. I turned away. I'll see you at the next meeting. Bring your checkbook. Caesar might need more startup capital when this falls through. Walking to my car, I heard Gemma call out, "That was amazing!" I managed a smile, but my hands were shaking. Standing up to my family had cost more than I'd expected, but seeing their faces when Gemma spoke, that made it worth it. My phone buzzed with a text from Autumn. How'd it go? I typed back, "War declared, battle lines drawn, but we're winning." Because this wasn't just about zoning anymore. This was about proving that sometimes the best revenge isn't just living well, it's living purposefully. Smile. The photographer from the local newspaper adjusted her camera. One more with the whole group. 3 months after the zoning battle, our retreat center was officially open. 20 women, including Gemma, gathered on the front steps. The renovated Victorian house gleamed behind us, its fresh paint and new sign catching the morning sun. "This is surreal," Rachel whispered beside me. "We're actually trending on social media." The article about our opening had gone viral overnight. Local woman transforms family drama into haven for abuse survivors. The headline alone had brought in dozens of inquiries. "Ms. Foster?" A reporter raised his hand. "Your brother's coffee shop opens next door next week. Any comments?" "This isn't about my brother," I replied firmly. "It's about these women and their stories, like Maria here, who's starting her own business after taking our entrepreneurship workshop." Maria stepped forward, beaming. "The retreat gave me confidence to pursue my catering dreams. Next month, I'm cooking for my first corporate event." More questions followed, but movement across the street caught my eye. Mom stood on our old house's porch, watching. She'd aged somehow in these past months, her hair grayer, her shoulders more stooped. "Excuse me," I said to the reporters. "Gemma, could you handle the rest of the questions?" Crossing the street felt like crossing an ocean. Mom didn't move as I approached. "The house looks beautiful," she said quietly. "You've done amazing work." "Thanks." I stood awkwardly, hands in my pockets. "How's Caesar's shop coming along?" She hesitated. "Having some supplier issues. The premium beans he ordered didn't arrive." "Of course they didn't." "Zoe, please." She turned to face me. "I know we hurt you. But seeing what you've built here, maybe it was meant to be this way." "Meant to be?" I laughed. "Mom, you sold my home without even talking to me. And look what you did with that pain." She gestured to the retreat. "You turned it into something beautiful, something meaningful." Before I could respond, Gemma called from across the street. "Zoe, the TV crew is here." "TV crew?" Mom's eyes widened. "Local news," I explained. "They're doing a feature on women-owned businesses in the area." "That's wonderful." She paused. "Caesar tried to get them interested in the coffee shop, but what? They said artisanal coffee wasn't newsworthy enough." I bit back a smile. "I should go." "Wait," Mom grabbed my arm. "There's something you should know. Your father and we're worried about Caesar's finances. The shop's renovations cost more than expected and—" "Stop." I held up my hand. "I don't want to know. Whatever hole he's dug himself into, it's not my problem." Back at the retreat, the TV crew was setting up in our newly finished community room. Women gathered around, sharing stories of how they'd found us. "The photography classes helped me see beauty again," one said into the microphone. "I learned to trust myself here," added another. Gemma, now our official program coordinator, organized everyone for the segment. "Zoe, they want to interview you last. Something about saving the best for final cut." The reporter, a sharp-eyed woman named Diana, sat across from me. "Your story is compelling," she said. "Converting family conflict into community support. Mind if we dig deeper?" "Actually, I do." I straightened my shoulders. "The conflict that led me here isn't the story. These women are. Their resilience, their courage to start over. That's what matters. Diana smiled. Even better, tell me about them. For the next hour, I shared our success stories. The domestic violence survivor who became a counselor, the divorced mother who started her own online business, the elderly woman who found community after losing her husband. One last question, Diana said. Your brother's coffee shop opens next door soon. Any message for him? I looked out the window at our old house, at Mom still standing on the porch. Just this. Sometimes losing what you thought you needed leads you to what you were meant to do all along. After the crews left, Gemma brought me coffee, not from an artisanal shop, but our simple kitchen machine. The waiting list is up to 30 women now, she said. We might need to think about expanding. Expanding? I nearly choked on my coffee. The property 2 doors down just went up for sale. Her eyes sparkled. Just saying. I watched the sunset paint our retreat in golden light, thinking about Mom's words. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was meant to be. My phone buzzed, a text from Autumn. Just saw the news crew. You're going to be famous. I typed back, not me, the retreat, the women, their stories. Because that's what mattered now. Not revenge, not family drama, but the lives we were helping rebuild, one day at a time. Though I had to admit, the fact that we were thriving while Caesar struggled did feel a little like karma. The pounding on my door at 2 a.m. could only mean trouble. I opened it to find Dad, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Caesar's in trouble, he said without preamble. Big trouble. When isn't he? I started to close the door, but Dad's next words froze me. He used the coffee shop as collateral for a loan, a high-interest loan from people you don't want to owe money to. Of course he did. I leaned against the doorframe. How much? 200,000. The number hit like a physical blow. Tell me you and Mom didn't co-sign. His silence was answer enough. Jesus, Dad. I ran my hands through my hair. The house money wasn't enough? You had to risk everything else too? He had a plan. He always has a plan. I was shouting now, not caring about my neighbors. And you always fall for it. The suppliers backed out, Dad continued. The equipment costs doubled. He got desperate. And now what? You want me to help clean up his mess? Again? A text lit up my phone. Gemma. Emergency at the retreat. Pipe burst in the east wing. I have to go, I told Dad. Real problems to solve. Zoe, please. These aren't nice people he borrowed from. They're coming tomorrow for their first payment. Then he better start brewing a lot of coffee. At the retreat, water was pouring through the ceiling. Gemma and 3 residents were already moving furniture, while Rachel coordinated with an emergency plumber on the phone. Second floor bathroom, Gemma explained, handing me a bucket. The plumber's on his way. We worked through the night, salvaging what we could. By dawn, the leak was fixed, but the damage was extensive. Insurance should cover it, Rachel said, surveying the wet walls. But we'll need to relocate the women in those rooms temporarily. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing. Calls from Mom, texts from Dad. Finally, one from Caesar. I screwed up. Bad. Please help. Everything okay? Gemma asked, noticing my expression. Family drama. I showed her the text. Caesar got involved with loan sharks. Shit. She whistled low. What are you going to do? Nothing. He made his bed. Zoe! Mom's voice rang through the retreat's front hall. She hurried in, mascara streaked down her face. They're at the coffee shop, right now. They're taking everything. I followed her next door. Through the coffee shop's windows, I could see men in dark suits removing equipment while Caesar argued frantically. You can't do this, he was saying as we entered. I just need more time. Time's up, one of the men said calmly. Should have read the contract better. I'll call the police, Mom threatened. Go ahead. The man smiled. Show them the loan documents you all signed. I watched my brother's dream being dismantled piece by piece. Part of me felt satisfaction, karma finally catching up. But another part remembered the little boy who used to protect me from playground bullies. Wait, I heard myself say. What would it take to stop this, right now? The man turned. First payment's 50 grand. Due now. I can have it in an hour, I said, if you leave the equipment. Everyone stared at me. Sis, Cesar's voice cracked. You don't have to— Shut up, I turned to the man. Deal? He nodded. 1 hour. At the bank, withdrawing nearly half my emergency fund, Cesar wouldn't look at me. This is a loan, I said firmly, with real paperwork and legal terms. You'll pay me back every cent. I know. He swallowed hard. I don't deserve— No, you don't. But Mom and Dad don't deserve to lose everything because of you, again. The coffee shop's failing anyway, he admitted. Even with all the equipment, I can't compete with the chains. Then sell it. Pay off your debts. Get a real job. Back at the retreat, Gemma was organizing a cleanup crew for the water damage. She took one look at my face and pulled me aside. You helped him, didn't you? I nodded. After everything he did? I didn't do it for him. I watched the women working together, supporting each other. I did it because that's what we're about here, helping people find better ways forward, even if those people sometimes don't deserve it. You're a better person than me, Gemma said. No, I smiled tiredly, just finally learning the difference between revenge and redemption. My phone buzzed, a message from Mom. Thank you for everything. I didn't respond. Some wounds were still too fresh, some bridges still too fragile. But maybe, just maybe, this was a start toward something new. Come on, Gemma tugged my arm. These walls won't dry themselves. And so I turned back to the work that mattered, leaving Cesar to figure out his own path forward. For once, I had nothing left to prove. The Governor's Office of Women's Initiatives wants to use our retreat as a model for the state program, Rachel announced, bursting into my office. They're sending a representative next week. 6 months after the coffee shop disaster, our retreat had become more successful than I'd ever imagined. Cesar had sold his failed business to a local restaurant group, and now I sat watching moving trucks pack up the last of his equipment. Earth to Zoe? Rachel waved her hand in front of my face. Did you hear what I said? State funding. Sorry, yes. I turned back to my desk. It's just weird, watching them dismantle everything he worked for. You mean everything he stole from your childhood home for? Yeah. I stood up. Speaking of which, where are we on the expansion plans? Rachel spread out blueprints across my desk. The bank approved our loan yesterday. We can start renovations on the new property next month. The front door chime rang, and Gemma's voice carried up the stairs. Zoe, your mother's here! Mom stood in the entrance hall, clutching her purse like a shield. The moving trucks. She gestured next door. I just couldn't watch. He's fine, Mom. The restaurant group hired him as a manager. I know. She looked around the retreat's newly renovated interior. This place— It's amazing, honey. The women I see coming and going, their faces when they leave. You've created something special. Thanks. I hesitated. Would you like a tour? We've made some changes since you were here last. As we walked through the house, Mom stopped at our wall of success stories, photos of women who'd graduated from our program, starting new lives. Is that Maria? She pointed to a picture of our former resident cutting a ribbon at her new catering business. She's handling all our event food now, I said proudly, and teaching cooking classes twice a week. Zoe, Gemma called from the office. The local business association is on the phone. They want you to speak at their annual dinner. Mom smiled. You're becoming quite the celebrity. Not me. The retreat. The women. I paused at the window overlooking our garden, where residents were tending the vegetable beds. Everything that happened, losing the house, Caesar's schemes, it led to this, to helping people find their strength. I'm sorry, Mom said suddenly, for not seeing it sooner. Your father and I, we were so focused on helping Caesar that we couldn't see how much we were hurting you. Mom. No, let me finish. She touched my arm. Watching you build this place, seeing the lives you're changing, you're the strong one. You always were. The front door chimed again. Caesar walked in looking different in his restaurant manager uniform. Hey, he said awkwardly. Last of the equipment's gone. He pulled an envelope from his pocket. First payment, as promised. I took the envelope. You're really doing it? working a regular job? Turns out I'm pretty good at managing other people's businesses. He attempted a smile. Better than running my own anyway. Caesar's been volunteering with our job training program, Gemma added, appearing with a stack of files. Teaching business basics, what not to do. Really? I looked at my brother with new eyes. Figured I owed you more than just money. He shrugged. These women, their stories, it puts things in perspective, you know? The doorbell chimed once more. Diana, the TV reporter, strode in with a camera crew. Ready for the follow-up piece? She asked. The local success story expands statewide angle is gold. Actually, I said, I have a better story. About redemption, family, and finding purpose in unexpected places. I looked at Mom and Caesar. Would you like to be part of it? The resulting segment went viral faster than the first. Family Feud transforms into community victory became our new narrative. Footage of Caesar teaching business classes, Mom organizing fundraisers, and our expanding programs painted a picture of healing that resonated far beyond our local community. That evening, standing in the garden with Autumn, I watched the sunset paint the old Victorian in golden light. Did you ever imagine this? She asked. When you first bought the place? Never. I smiled as a group of residents walked past, laughing together. I wanted revenge. Instead, I found purpose. And now you're changing lives. We're changing lives, I corrected. All of us. My phone buzzed. An email from the governor's office confirming their visit. Below it, a text from Dad. Proud of you, sweetheart. Always have been. I looked at our retreat, then at my old home next door. The pain of losing it had faded, replaced by something stronger. The knowledge that sometimes our greatest losses lead to our most important discoveries. Come on, I told Autumn. We've got work to do. Because this wasn't just my story anymore. It belonged to every woman who walked through our doors, seeking a new beginning. And somehow, that was better than any revenge I could have planned. Ready? Gemma stood beside me at the front door of my childhood home. Through the window, I could see my family gathered in the living room. Not really. I gripped the small box in my hands tighter. But it's time. Inside, Mom was arranging cookies on a plate while Dad and Caesar hung a congratulations banner. The governor's award for community excellence sat on the mantel, right where my childhood photos used to be. There's our woman of the hour, Dad called out. The banner's crooked, I said, trying to steady my voice. Some things never change, Mom laughed. Remember when we hung your graduation banner? I remember. I set the box on the coffee table. That's actually why I wanted everyone here today. Autumn slipped in behind us, camera ready. She'd been documenting the retreat's journey from the start. Before we celebrate the award, I began, I need to return something. I opened the box, revealing a stack of old photographs. These are all the pictures I took from the house before you sold it. I've been holding on to them like weapons. Caesar shifted uncomfortably. Sis. Let me finish. I pulled out the first photo. All of us at the beach, much younger, much happier. I've been so angry about losing this house that I forgot what made it special wasn't the building. It was us, even when we were mess. Mom wiped her eyes. We were quite a mess, weren't we? Still are, I smiled. But different now. I handed each of them a photo. To Mom, the picture of us baking Christmas cookies. To Dad, the one of him building our treehouse. To Cesar, a shot of him teaching me to ride a bike. The retreat taught me something, I continued. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means building something new from what's left. Speaking of building, Gemma interjected, right on cue. Should we tell them? I nodded. The state funding came through. We're opening 3 new retreat locations. 3? Caesar's eyes widened. That's amazing. And I took a deep breath. We want to use the old coffee shop space for our first youth center. For teenage girls who need support before crisis hits. The room fell silent. The coffee shop space, still owned by our parents, had been sitting empty since Caesar's business failed. It's yours, Dad said immediately. No. I shook my head. Not given, bought. Properly this time. I have the paperwork ready. Mom started to protest, but I held up my hand. This needs to be business, not family. We've learned that lesson, right? Caesar laughed. Yeah, the hard way. But, I added, I would like my family involved. Mom, your fundraising skills are incredible. Dad, we need someone to oversee the renovation. And Caesar, let me guess, business classes on what not to do. Actually, we need a proper operations manager, someone who's learned from their mistakes and knows how to help others avoid them. His jaw dropped. Are you serious? Professional salary, benefits, the works. Rachel's drawn up a contract. I met his eyes. Think you can handle working for your little sister? I'd be honored. His voice cracked slightly. Autumn snapped pictures as we hugged, capturing the moment our family's healing became official. Later, standing in what would become the youth center, I found the old height marks on the wall, still visible under layers of paint. My fingers traced the notches, Caesar's growth spurts, my steady climb. Keep them, Mom said behind me. Let the girls add their own marks, show them how growth happens slowly, but it happens. Like us? She hugged me. Like us. Outside, the retreat's lights glowed warmly in the dusk. Women moved between buildings, carrying books, laptops, dreams. In the garden, a new resident was crying on Gemma's shoulder while Rachel sat nearby, ready to help plan next steps. You did it, Autumn said, reviewing her photos. You turned pain into purpose. We did it, I corrected. All of us. My phone buzzed. Another girl seeking shelter. Another story waiting to be rewritten. As I read the message, I realized something. The house I'd fought so hard to save had given me something far more valuable than memories. It had given me a mission. Ready to change another life? Gemma called out. Always, I replied, heading back to the retreat. Behind me, my family began planning the youth center renovation, their voices mixing with the sounds of women rebuilding their lives. This wasn't the revenge I'd planned. It was better. Because sometimes the best way to heal old wounds isn't to get even, but to get better. To build something so beautiful from the ashes of what was lost that even those who hurt you want to be part of it. And that's a victory sweeter than any revenge could ever be.
I'm Kelly, and I grew up in what you'd call a good family. Mom and Dad loved me to bits and made sure I got the best education possible. Life was pretty sweet, I gotta say. But the real gem in my childhood? That was Sarah. Sarah and I met in elementary school, and from day one, we were thick as thieves. We shared everything, our dreams, our fears, our deepest secrets. I remember this one time in high school when Sarah called me in tears. It was past midnight, and I snuck out of my window to meet her at our secret spot in the park. Kelly, I think I'm in love, she sobbed as soon as I got there. It's Jake from chemistry class. I burst out laughing. Jake? The one who set his lab coat on fire last week? Sarah punched my arm, but she was giggling too. Stop it. He's cute. We spent the next hour dissecting every interaction she'd ever had with Jake, planning how she could get his attention. That's just how we rolled, no secret too big, no problem too small. As we grew older, our bond only got stronger. We were there for each other through our awkward phases, our first kisses, our heartbreaks. When graduation came around, it felt like the end of an era. I can't believe we're going to different colleges, Sarah said, her voice cracking as we hugged goodbye. Hey, distance ain't got nothing on us, I reassured her, even as I felt a lump in my throat. We've got Skype, remember? It'll be like I never left. And you know what? For a while, it was. We'd Skype almost every night, catching up on our day, gossiping about our new classmates, complaining about assignments. It was different, sure, but we made it work. But as time went on, I started noticing changes in Sarah. I don't get it, Kelly, she'd say, her face pixelated on my laptop screen. Why don't guys ever notice me? Am I that invisible? Come on, Sarah, I'd reply, trying to cheer her up. You're amazing. The right guy just hasn't come along yet. She'd give me this look, half sad, half envious. Easy for you to say, you're beautiful. Guys are probably falling all over themselves to date you. I never knew how to respond to that. Sure, I'd had my fair share of dates, but it wasn't like I was fighting off admirers with a stick. And besides, Sarah was pretty too, in her own quiet way. I just wished she could see it. After college, Sarah and I both found ourselves back in our hometown. It felt like old times, but something had shifted. Maybe it was the years apart, or maybe we'd just grown up. Either way, I was determined to keep our friendship strong. We fell back into our old routines pretty quickly. Weekends were for parties, catching up, and reminiscing about the good old days. It was at one of these parties that everything started to change. I remember it clear as day. We were at this crowded bar, the music thumping so loud you could barely hear yourself think. Sarah was nursing her drink, her eyes scanning the room. "Oh my God, Kelly," she suddenly grabbed my arm. "Look at that guy by the bar. Isn't he gorgeous?" I followed her gaze to a tall, dark-haired guy leaning against the bar. He was handsome, I'll give her that. "Yeah, he's cute," I agreed. "Why don't you go talk to him?" Sarah's face fell. "Are you kidding? He wouldn't look twice at me." Before I could argue, the guy looked our way. But instead of noticing Sarah, his eyes locked on me. He smiled and started walking over. "Hi there," he said, his voice deep and warm. "I'm Tom. Can I buy you a drink?" I glanced at Sarah, who was staring at her shoes. Thanks, but I'm good," I replied, trying to include my friend. "I'm Kelly, and this is my friend Sarah." Tom barely acknowledged Sarah, his attention fully on me. "Well, Kelly, how about a dance then?" Reluctantly, I let Tom lead me to the dance floor. As we swayed to the music, I couldn't help but feel guilty, knowing Sarah was watching from the sidelines. Over the next few weeks, Tom was persistent. He'd call, text, even show up at places he knew I'd be. At first, I didn't take it seriously. But there was something about his charm, his determination, that started to win me over. When I finally agreed to a proper date, I was nervous about telling Sarah. We met for coffee, and I broke the news. "So, Tom asked me out," I said, stirring my latte. And I said yes. "Are you okay with this?" Her eyes flashed with something, anger? Jealousy? Before she shrugged. "Why wouldn't I be? It's not like I have a chance with guys like that anyway. I'm just happy for you." But she wasn't. As Tom and I grew closer, Sarah became more distant. She'd cancel plans, ignore my texts, and when we did hang out, there was this tension I couldn't quite put my finger on. One night, after another canceled plan, I called her out on it. "What's going on, Sarah? You've been acting weird ever since I started dating Tom." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I can't do this anymore, Kelly. I don't think we should be friends anymore." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What? Why?" "Sarah, if this is about Tom..." "It's not just about Tom," she exploded. "It's about everything. You've always had it easy, Kelly. You're pretty, you're smart, guys fall all over you. And I'm just tired of being the sidekick in the Kelly show." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in disbelief. I wanted to fix it, to make her understand that she wasn't just a sidekick to me. But as the days turned into weeks with no word from Sarah, I started to accept that maybe our friendship had run its course. 2 years flew by in a whirlwind of love and laughter with Tom. He was everything I could have hoped for in a partner, kind, funny, and supportive. Then, on a crisp autumn evening, Tom took me to our favorite spot in the park. As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, he dropped to one knee and pulled out a small velvet box. That night, lying in bed next to Tom, I made a decision. I'd reach out to Sarah. Maybe enough time had passed for us to mend our friendship. The next day, with shaking hands, I dialed her number. To my surprise, she answered on the second ring. "Hey, Sarah," I said, suddenly nervous. "I have some news. Tom proposed, we're getting married." There was a long pause. I held my breath, waiting for her reaction. "Wow," she finally said. That's great, Kelly, congratulations." "Thanks," I replied, relief washing over me. "Listen, Sarah, I know things have been rough between us, but I miss you. Would you like to meet up?" Another pause. "Yeah, I'd like that," she said slowly. We met at our old favorite coffee shop. Sarah looked good, her hair was shorter, and she seemed more confident somehow. As we sipped our lattes, the awkwardness slowly melted away. "I'm sorry," Sarah said suddenly, "for how I acted before. I was jealous and insecure. It wasn't fair to you." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I'm sorry too. I should have been more sensitive to your feelings." Sarah's eyes lit up. "So, tell me about the proposal. And the ring, let me see it." From that day on, Sarah became a constant presence in our lives. She'd come over to discuss wedding details, help with DIY decorations, and even offered to edit a romantic video about Tom and me for the reception. "It'll be perfect," she assured me, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "A beautiful tribute to your love story." I was overjoyed. Not only was I marrying the man of my dreams, but I had my best friend back. Life couldn't get any better. As the wedding day approached, I took time off work to focus on the final preparations. Between dress fittings, menu tastings, and last-minute details, I barely had time to breathe, let alone spend quality time with Tom. 3 days before the wedding, as I was double-checking the seating arrangements, my phone buzzed with a message from my cousin, Lisa. She worked at a hotel in town, and the message she sent shattered my world. "Kelly, I'm so sorry, but I think you need to see this," the message read, followed by a video. With trembling hands, I pressed play. The grainy security footage showed Tom and Sarah, wrapped in each other's arms, kissing passionately as they entered a hotel room. The timestamp on the video was from just minutes ago. My world had just crumbled around me, but I wasn't about to sit and wallow. With a newfound determination, I grabbed my car keys and headed to the hotel where my cousin Lisa worked. The same hotel where my fiancé and supposed best friend were currently betraying me. As I drove, my mind raced. Lisa's message kept replaying in my head, "Kelly, I'm so sorry, but I think you need to see this." She'd always been more like a sister to me than a cousin, and I was grateful for her loyalty. Tom had never met her, which turned out to be a stroke of luck in this nightmare scenario. I pulled into the hotel parking lot, my hands shaking as I turned off the engine. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out and walked into the lobby, spotting Lisa at the reception desk. "Kelly," she said softly as I approached, her eyes full of sympathy. "I'm so sorry." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Lisa glanced around quickly, then gestured for me to follow her. "Come with me," she whispered. "I have an idea." She led me to a small room near the stairwell. It was barely bigger than a closet, with a chair facing a small window. "It's a security observation room," Lisa explained. "You can see people coming and going on the stairs, but they can't see you." We waited in tense silence. I kept my phone ready, determined to gather more evidence of their betrayal. After what felt like an eternity, I heard familiar voices. "That was amazing," Sarah's breathy voice drifted up the stairwell. "You're such an incredible lover, Tom." I felt bile rise in my throat as Tom's deep chuckle followed. "You're not so bad yourself, babe. Kelly doesn't even compare." They came into view, and I hit record on my phone, my hand surprisingly steady. Tom had his arm around Sarah's waist, pulling her close as they descended the stairs. "What about after the wedding?" Sarah asked, a hint of worry in her voice. "Will we still be able to do this?" Tom stopped, turning to face her. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her deeply. I zoomed in, capturing every excruciating detail. "Of course we will," Tom said as they broke apart. "You think a little thing like marriage is going to stop me from being with you? We'll find ways to sneak off during the reception. Maybe even during the ceremony if we're clever." They both laughed, the sound grating on my ears. Sarah playfully swatted his arm. "You're terrible, but I love it." "And I love you," Tom replied, kissing her again. I stopped the recording, feeling sick. Lisa put a comforting hand on my shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Kelly. What are you going to do?" I stood up, a plan already forming in my mind. "I'm going to make them pay," I said, my voice cold and determined. "They think they can laugh about sneaking around at my wedding? Well, I've got a surprise for them." The next 3 days were an exquisite form of torture. Every smile from Sarah, every touch from Tom, felt like a knife twisting in my gut. They played their parts perfectly, the supportive best friend and the loving fiancé. If I hadn't seen the video with my own eyes, I might have convinced myself it was all a terrible mistake. The bachelorette party was the ultimate test of my acting skills. Sarah had organized it, inviting all our mutual friends. My cousin Lisa was there too, a silent pillar of support. As we sipped champagne and played silly wedding-themed games, I felt like I was watching the scene from outside my body. Sarah leaned in to whisper, "I'm so happy for you, Kelly. You and Tom are perfect together." I nearly choked on my drink. Lisa, noticing my distress, quickly grabbed my hand and squeezed it reassuringly. I shot her a grateful look. Without her, I might have lost it right then and there, screaming at Sarah for her betrayal. Instead, I plastered on a smile and raised my glass. Thanks to my amazing maid of honor for this wonderful party. The girls cheered, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension. Sarah beamed, basking in the praise, while I imagined dumping my drink over her head. The night before the wedding, Sarah came over with a flash drive. "I've got a surprise for you," she said, her eyes twinkling. "I put together a video of all your romantic moments with Tom. We'll play it before the ceremony tomorrow. It'll be so beautiful." As soon as she left, a plan began to form in my mind. I looked at the flash drive, then at my phone where the damning video was stored. A cruel smile spread across my face. Oh, there would be a video played tomorrow, all right, but not the one Sarah was expecting. I was so caught up in my thoughts that I didn't hear Tom come in. "Whoa," he said, stopping short. "What's with that look?" I forced a laugh. "Oh, that. I was just thinking about tomorrow. I can't wait for the ceremony." Tom's face softened. He crossed the room and pulled me into his arms. "I can't wait either. I love you so much, Kelly. I'll always be faithful to you, I promise." The irony of his words made me want to scream. Instead, I buried my face in his chest, pretending my shudders were from happiness rather than rage. As I lay in bed that night, listening to Tom's steady breathing beside me, I finalized my plan. I would swap the videos early in the morning, before anyone else arrived at the venue. Sarah's lovingly crafted montage of lies would be replaced with the raw, ugly truth. Part of me felt guilty for what I was about to do. It would be so public, so humiliating. But then I remembered the way Tom and Sarah had laughed about sneaking away during the wedding, and my resolve hardened. The morning of what should have been my wedding day dawned bright and clear. As guests began to arrive, I plastered on a smile, playing the role of the blushing bride. Sarah fluttered around me, adjusting my veil and gushing about how beautiful everything looked. It took every ounce of self-control not to slap her. Finally, it was time. The guests were seated, an expectant hush falling over the room. Tom stood at the altar, looking handsome and completely unsuspecting. Sarah gave me a thumbs up from the side, ready to play her carefully crafted video. Before we begin, the officiant announced, "We have a special presentation to set the mood for this joyous occasion." I closed my eyes as the video began to play. For a moment, there was only confusion as the grainy hotel footage appeared instead of the expected romantic montage. Then, as Tom and Sarah's voices filled the room, discussing their affair in explicit detail, all hell broke loose. Gasps of shock rippled through the audience. Tom's face drained of color, while Sarah let out a strangled cry. I stood there, my heart pounding, as the truth I'd been carrying for days was finally exposed. The silence that followed the video was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop. Then, Sarah's parents erupted. "How dare you?" her mother shrieked, pointing at me. "How could you humiliate our daughter like this? You're cruel and spiteful." Before I could respond, my own parents jumped to my defense. "Your daughter is the cruel one," my father roared. "She betrayed Kelly. And you," he turned to Tom, his face red with anger, "you're a scoundrel. A bastard. You have no place in our family." The venue descended into chaos. Guests began taking sides, some defending me, others condemning my actions. She had every right to expose them, I heard someone shout. But to do it like this? On her wedding day? It's too much, another argued. I stood in the middle of it all, a strange calm washing over me. This was it. The moment I'd been building towards for days. As the shouting continued, I finally raised my voice. "Enough." Surprisingly, the room fell silent, all eyes turning to me. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice steady. "I'm sorry you all had to witness this. But I'm not sorry for exposing the truth. Clearly, there won't be a wedding today. Please, feel free to take your gifts home with you. And thank you for being here, even if it didn't turn out the way any of us expected." With that, I turned and walked out of the venue, leaving the murmuring crowd behind me. As I stepped into the sunlight, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was over. The truth was out. 5 days later, a notification popped up on my phone. It was from Tom. My heart raced as I opened the message, unsure of what to expect. "Kelly, what you did was cruel and unnecessary. You've humiliated me and Sarah in front of everyone we know. You need to take responsibility for your actions. I expect you to pay for all the wedding penalties and compensate me for the emotional distress you've caused. If you refuse, I'll be forced to take legal action." I stared at the screen, a mixture of disbelief and anger washing over me. He was the one who cheated, and now he was threatening me? I typed out a quick, curt response. "You've got to be kidding me, Tom. You and Sarah are the ones who should be paying for everything. Don't contact me again." I blocked him immediately after sending the message, my hands shaking with rage. A trial? Let him try. I had video evidence of his infidelity. But the thought of dragging this out in court made me feel sick. Just as I was starting to spiral into anxiety about potential legal battles, my phone rang. It was Margaret, Tom's mother. Hesitantly, I answered. "Hello, Kelly. Tom's father and I want to apologize. What our son did was inexcusable. We're so sorry for the pain he's caused you." I sat down heavily, taken aback by this unexpected turn. "Thank you," I managed to say. "We want you to know," Margaret continued, "that we'll be covering all the wedding expenses and penalties. It's the least we can do. And please, don't worry about Tom's threats. We've made it clear to him that he's to leave you alone." Relief washed over me. "I appreciate that, Margaret, thank you." After hanging up, I found myself replaying the events of the past week in my mind. Had I done the right thing? Could I have handled it differently? The questions swirled in my head, keeping me up at night. But every time I started to doubt myself, I remembered the video of Tom and Sarah, laughing about sneaking away during what should have been my wedding. My jaw would clench, and I'd feel that same surge of righteous anger. As the weeks passed, I slowly started to emerge from my self-imposed isolation. I went back to work, started going to the gym again, even met up with a few friends who had stood by me through everything. But when Lisa gently suggested setting me up with a friend of hers, I quickly declined. "I'm not ready," I told her. "I need time to heal, to figure out who I am on my own." She nodded understandingly. "Take all the time you need. We're here for you when you're ready." Months passed, and life settled into a new normal. I threw myself into work, picked up new hobbies, and slowly but surely, the ache in my heart began to dull. I was healing, one day at a time. It was during a casual lunch with some colleagues that I first heard the news. "Did you see Sarah's latest post?" one of them asked, her eyes wide with gossip. "She and Tom are officially dating now." My coworker slid her phone across the table. There it was, in full color, a selfie of Tom and Sarah, looking sickeningly happy. The caption read, "Finally with the man I love, despite all the vile machinations of envious people. True love conquers all. Blessed in love." I handed the phone back, my stomach churning. The implication was clear, I was the envious people she was referring to. As if I'd been the one to break them up, rather than expose their affair. I forced a smile. They deserve each other. And I meant it. Let them have their fairy tale ending. I was done with both of them. Life went on. I focused on myself, on building the life I wanted. And then, a few months later, another piece of gossip made its way to me. This time, it was Lisa who broke the news. "Kelly, you won't believe this," she said over the phone, her voice a mix of disbelief and amusement. "Tom broke up with Sarah. He posted about it on Facebook." "What? Why?" I couldn't help but be curious. According to his post, and I quote, "I'm tired of the overly clingy and possessive behavior from my partner. I need my space and freedom." I couldn't help but laugh. It started as a small chuckle and grew into a full-blown belly laugh. It wasn't just schadenfreude, though I'd be lying if I said that wasn't part of it. It was closure. Final proof that I'd dodged a bullet with both of them. A week later, it was my birthday. I'd planned a small gathering with my closest friends and family. As I was getting ready, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Sarah standing there, looking nervous and clutching a beautifully wrapped gift. "Kelly," she said, her voice small. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm so sorry. I was stupid and selfish, and I ruined the best friendship I've ever had. Can we try to fix this?" She held out the gift, her eyes pleading. I looked at it, then back at her. In that moment, I saw our whole history flash before my eyes. The good times, the bad times, and the ultimate betrayal. I took a deep breath. "No, Sarah, we can't." Her face fell. "Kelly, please." "I appreciate your apology," I cut her off, my voice firm but not unkind. "But some things can't be fixed. What you and Tom did, it wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice. You betrayed my trust in the worst possible way." I gently pushed the gift back towards her. "I don't want your gift, and I don't see any point in trying to rebuild a friendship with someone I can't trust. I wish you well, Sarah, but I think it's best if we go our separate ways." I closed the door and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. Then I smiled. My real friends would be arriving soon, to celebrate my birthday. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I'd been through hell and come out stronger on the other side. And as the doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of my true friends, I felt ready for whatever the future might bring. The past was behind me, and the road ahead was wide open. It was time to start the next chapter of my life, and this time, I was the one holding the pen. My name's Audrey, and I used to be your typical married woman with a steady job as a stockbroker at some big shot company. I had it all, a decent job, a husband of 7 years, and an adorable little girl who was growing up faster than I could blink. But you know how they say life can change in an instant? One day, my husband drops this bomb on me. He's been fooling around with some knockout, and now he's head over heels for her. Just like that, he wants a divorce. I remember standing there, my mouth hanging open like a fish out of water, trying to wrap my head around what he just said. "You're, what?" I managed to choke out. He had the decency to look a little ashamed, at least. "I'm sorry, Audrey. I didn't mean for this to happen, but I can't help how I feel." I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make him feel as shitty as I did right then. "What about our daughter?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He ran a hand through his hair, looking everywhere but at me. "I'll still be there for her, of course. I'm not abandoning her. Yeah, just me, I thought bitterly. The next few weeks were a blur of tears, anger, and more paperwork than I ever wanted to see in my life. My ex, to his credit, didn't try to screw me over. He paid a hefty sum in compensation without dragging me through court, and he set up a generous alimony for our little girl. Small consolations, but I'll take what I can get. First thing I did? Changed my name back to my maiden name, Collins, and my daughter's too. The next 5 years were, well, they were something. I threw myself into work, trying to fill the void left by my failed marriage. We had our struggles, sure, but we made it work. Then, just when I thought life had settled into a new normal, it threw me another curveball. My ex-husband died. I stood there at his funeral, our daughter's hand in mine, feeling a strange mix of emotions I couldn't quite name. Grief? Confusion? Anger? All of the above? As we were about to leave, this guy in a suit approached us. Turned out to be my ex's lawyer. Ms. Collins, he corrected himself, glancing at his papers. Your ex-husband left everything to you and your daughter. He left a letter for you as well. I stood there, letter in hand, feeling like the ground had just shifted beneath my feet. That night, after tucking my daughter into bed, I sat at the kitchen table and opened the letter with trembling hands. As I read, I felt a whirlwind of emotions. Audrey, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I hope you'll find it in your heart to grant me this last request. I realized my mistake in leaving you, but by then, it was too late to undo the damage I'd caused. I'm leaving everything to you and our daughter. Please use it to give her the best life possible. And Audrey, I hope you can find happiness again. You deserve it. I'm sorry for everything. Your stupid husband, Jason Moore. I don't know how long I sat there, tears streaming down my face. The bastard had the nerve to apologize now? But as my anger faded, I realized I had been given an opportunity. A chance to secure a better future for my daughter and myself. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings with financial advisors and lawyers. Suddenly, I was wealthy. It was surreal. I set up a hefty education fund for my daughter, ensuring her future was secure. But I wasn't content to just sit on this money. I'd always been good at my job, and now I had the capital to strike out on my own. So, I did something that surprised even me. I opened my own brokerage firm. You're doing what? My best friend, Sarah, asked over coffee one day. I grinned, feeling more alive than I had in years. Opening my own firm. And get this, I'm naming it after my ex-husband's last name. Sarah's eyebrows shot up. Are you serious? After everything he put you through? I shrugged. Call it a thank you for the seed money. Besides, it's a good name for business. And you know what? It turned out I had a knack for running my own show. The company took off like a rocket. Before I knew it, I was hiring staff, expanding operations, and raking in profits that made my old salary look like pocket change. One day, as I was leaving the office late, again, my assistant caught me at the elevator. Ms. Audrey, your daughter called. She said it's not an emergency, but she'd like you to call her back when you can. I felt a pang of guilt. I'd been so wrapped up in work lately, I hadn't been spending much time at home. Thanks, Jessica. I'll call her right now. In the car, I dialed home. My daughter picked up on the first ring. Mom, are you coming home soon? The weariness in her voice broke my heart. I'm on my way now, sweetheart. Is everything okay? There was a pause. Yeah, I guess. It's just, you're never home anymore. I miss you. As I hung up, I realized something had to change. I'd escaped one trap of workaholism only to fall into another. It was time to reassess my priorities. The next day, I called a meeting with my top executives. It was time to make some changes, both in the company and in my life. As I looked around the conference room at the team I'd built, I knew I was making the right decision. I'd decided to step back from day-to-day operations, I announced, ignoring their shocked expressions. It's time I focused on what's really important, my family. I hired a capable director to handle daily operations, and I took on a more passive role. It felt strange at first, like I was letting go of a part of myself. But the moment I saw my daughter's face light up when I picked her up from school, I knew I'd made the right choice. As we walked to the car, she chattered excitedly about her day. I realized with a pang of guilt how much I'd been missing. "Hey," I said as we buckled up. "How about we take a little trip this weekend? Just you and me?" That weekend getaway turned into a series of adventures. We traveled, explored new places, and most importantly, spent time together. I enrolled her in various after-school activities, art classes, language lessons, you name it. She was thriving, and I was there to see every moment of it. The years flew by, and before I knew it, my little girl was heading off to college. She'd grown into a remarkable young woman, smart, kind, and surprisingly humble, despite our wealth. She'd chosen to study architecture, a decision that filled me with pride. The day we moved her into her dorm, I reflected on how much our lives had changed. From the struggles of single motherhood to the unexpected windfall, and now this new chapter. I wondered what the future held for both of us. I didn't have to wait long to find out. A few years later, my daughter graduated with honors and landed a job at a prestigious architecture firm. She was thriving in her career, and I couldn't have been prouder. Then came the day she called me, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Mom, I've met someone. It's serious." I felt a flutter of excitement and a touch of apprehension. "That's wonderful, honey. Tell me about him." She gushed about her new boyfriend, who happened to be the head of her department. As I listened, I felt a mix of joy for her happiness and a protective instinct I couldn't quite shake. As my daughter's relationship grew more serious, I found myself thinking about the future. I'd been living in our big house alone for years, and it suddenly felt too empty, too full of memories. That's when I made a decision that surprised even me. I started house hunting, but not for another mansion. No, I was looking for something with character, something that needed a little love. And I found it, an old house with a neglected garden and worn interiors, but with an atmosphere that spoke to me. When I told my daughter about my plans, she was shocked. "Mom, are you sure? That place sounds like it needs a lot of work." I laughed. "That's the point, sweetie. I need a project, something to pour my energy into." She hesitated. "But what about our house? All those memories?" I took her hand. "Those memories are in our hearts, not in the walls. Besides, I think it's time for you to have that house. You and your future husband will need the space." Her eyes widened. "Mom, we're not even engaged yet." I winked at her. Call it mother's intuition. So, I bought the old house and threw myself into renovating it. It was hard work, but satisfying. As I stripped wallpaper and repainted walls, I felt like I was rebuilding a part of myself too. One day, as I was wrestling with an overgrown rosebush in the garden, my phone rang. It was my daughter. "Mom, he proposed," she squealed before I could even say hello. I nearly dropped the pruning shears. "Oh honey, that's wonderful. Congratulations. We want you to meet him properly," she said. "Can we come over to your new place this weekend?" I looked around at the half-finished renovations and dirt-smudged walls. "Are you sure you don't want to meet somewhere nicer?" "No, Mom," she insisted. "We want to see your new home." The weekend arrived faster than I expected. I was out in the garden, trying to make some semblance of order in the chaos of weeds, when I heard a car pull up. "Mom," my daughter called out. "We're here." I stood up, wiping my dirty hands on my even dirtier work clothes. As they approached, I got my first look at my daughter's fiancé. He was tall, well-dressed, and had a polite smile on his face. But something in his eyes made me pause. I extended my hand. "It's nice to finally meet you. I'm Audrey." He looked at my dirt-covered hand with an expression I couldn't quite read. Was that disgust? No, surely I was imagining things. Pleased to meet you, he said, barely touching my hand before quickly letting go. As we walked into the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He examined the old furnishings and half-finished renovations with poorly concealed disdain. So, Audrey, he said, turning to me. How did you afford to send your daughter to such a good college if you're living in a place like this? I caught my daughter's shocked expression and decided to have a little fun. I winked at her, hoping she'd play along. Oh, my ex-husband helped out with that, I said casually. We divorced years ago, but he made sure our daughter was taken care of. The young man's face tightened even more at the word divorce. I could practically see him reassessing me, and not in a good way. Would you like something to eat? I offered, gesturing to the simple spread I'd prepared. No, thank you, he said quickly. I'm not hungry. But I knew the truth, he just didn't want to eat off my old plates in my quaint house. As they were leaving, my daughter hung back for a moment. Mom, why didn't you tell him about, everything? I smiled. Let's keep that our little secret for now, okay? I want to get to know him without all that getting in the way. She nodded, though she looked confused. As I watched them drive away, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in my gut. Something told me this was just the beginning of a very interesting journey. 6 months passed in a whirlwind of wedding preparations and hushed conversations. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling I had about my daughter's fiancé, but I kept my concerns to myself. Then, on a bright Sunday afternoon, my daughter surprised me with a visit, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Mom, she called out as she burst through the door of my still-in-progress home. We've set a date for the wedding. There's more. We want you to meet his parents this weekend. They're hosting a dinner at their place. My stomach did a little flip, but I plastered on a smile. Of course, I'd love to meet them. As the weekend approached, I found myself fretting over what to wear. I settled on a simple, elegant dress I'd had tailored years ago. It wasn't designer, but it was classic and well-made. I hoped it would be appropriate for whatever awaited me. The day of the dinner, I drove through neighborhoods that got progressively more upscale until I reached the address my daughter had given me. I had to double-check to make sure I hadn't made a mistake. The house, if you could call it that, was more like a palace. It stood imposingly at the end of a long, winding driveway, all gleaming windows and perfectly manicured lawns. As I parked my modest car among the luxury vehicles, I felt like a dandelion in a garden of roses. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I was here for my daughter, and made my way to the front door. My daughter's future in-laws descended the grand staircase like royalty greeting a commoner. They were impeccably dressed, dripping in jewels that probably cost more than my entire house. Welcome, the mother said, her voice sickly sweet. Her smile was wide but didn't quite reach her eyes. We're so pleased to finally meet you. Her husband, a stern-looking man with silver hair, nodded curtly. Yes, we're absolutely thrilled that your daughter will be joining our family. She'll want for nothing now, I can assure you of that. I bit the inside of my cheek, forcing myself to maintain a polite smile. That's very kind of you to say. The mother laughed, a tinkling sound that set my teeth on edge. Oh, we're not kind, dear. We're just not prejudiced. We're more than happy to welcome your daughter into our family, despite, well, I felt my eyebrow raise of its own accord. I'm afraid I don't know. What exactly do you mean? The woman's smile turned patronizing, and she reached out to pat my arm condescendingly. Well, dear, we know all about your modest circumstances. Our son has told us everything. Raising a child all alone, living in that poor little house of yours. He mentioned it's practically falling apart at the seams. It must have been so difficult for you. Her words hung in the air, dripping with false sympathy and real disdain. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, she continued, her voice lowered as if sharing a secret. But don't you worry. Once your daughter marries our son, she'll never have to think about money again. She'll finally know what it's like to live in a real home, not some crumbling shack. I felt my daughter tense beside me, but I gave her a reassuring smile and turned back to her future mother-in-law. "Please, do continue," I said, my voice steady despite the anger bubbling inside me. "I'm fascinated to hear more about your generous perspective." The woman seemed to take this as an invitation to further display her condescension. "Oh, darling, I hope you're not expecting any handouts from us. We believe in earning one's way, you see. We won't be extending our generosity beyond our new daughter-in-law." I nodded, forcing a look of understanding onto my face. Of course, I wouldn't dream of it. Deciding to play along with their assumptions, I adopted a meek demeanor. "I'm just grateful my daughter will have such opportunities." This seemed to please them, and they visibly relaxed. As we moved to the opulent dining room, I couldn't help but notice the groom's father eyeing me with a mixture of pity and disdain. "So, tell me," I said, turning to him. "What line of work are you in?" He puffed up with pride. "I'm a stockbroker, one of the best in the business, if I do say so myself." "Oh, how interesting," I replied, feigning ignorance. "Which company, if you don't mind me asking?" When he named the company, my company, I had to use every ounce of self-control not to react. I caught my daughter's eye, and we shared a brief, knowing look. As the evening wore on and the wine flowed freely, the groom's father became increasingly boastful. He leaned towards me, his words slightly slurred. "You know," he said in a conspiratorial tone, "you can't make real money by playing by the rules." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, how do you mean?" He gestured grandly at the luxurious surroundings. "You think I got all this by being a good little employee?" "Huh." He leaned in closer, the smell of expensive wine on his breath. "I've got a system, see? I use the company's resources to wine and dine potential clients, then I redirect them to my personal investment schemes. All the profit, none of the overhead." I felt my daughter's hand tighten on mine under the table. I squeezed back, silently urging her to stay quiet. "But surely that's risky?" I asked, careful to keep my tone curious rather than accusatory. He waved his hand dismissively. "Bah, the company's too big to notice. And even if they did, I'm too valuable to let go. It's a perfect setup." As he continued to boast about his fraudulent activities, I simply smiled and nodded, all the while making mental notes. This evening had certainly turned out to be more illuminating than I could have ever imagined. As the evening progressed, the groom's mother stood up with a flourish. "Shall we move to the dining room? Dinner is served." We followed her into an equally opulent dining room, where a table groaned under the weight of fine china and crystal. As everyone took their seats, I noticed the others had plates piled high with gourmet dishes. But when I looked down at my own place setting, I was stunned to see a cheap plastic bowl filled with instant noodles. The groom's mother's voice dripped with false sweetness. "We thought you'd prefer something more familiar. After all, beggars can't be choosers, can they? We wouldn't want to overwhelm you with our fancy food." I felt my daughter stiffen beside me, her face flushing with anger. Before I could react, she stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Mom, we're leaving, now." Her voice shook with barely contained rage. The groom reached for her arm. "Honey, please, they didn't mean." She yanked her arm away. "Don't touch me. How dare you all sit here and insult my mother like this? I won't stand for it." Her fiancé's face darkened. "You'll come crawling back," he sneered. "Where else are you going to find someone as rich and promising as me?" I stood up slowly, pride swelling in my chest for my daughter's strength. But before we left, I had one last card to play. "Before we go," I said calmly, "I have a question. Did you know that the last name I use is actually my maiden name?" The groom's parents exchanged confused glances. "My married name," I continued, "is the same as your company's name." "More." I looked pointedly at the groom's father. Their faces paled as realization dawned. "That's right," I said, my voice steely. "I own the company you work for. And I'm very interested in investigating the fraudulent activities you so kindly shared with me earlier." Suddenly, their demeanor changed completely. They began pleading, apologizing profusely, their earlier arrogance replaced by desperation. "Please, we didn't know. We can explain everything." My daughter and I exchanged disgusted looks at their sudden change of heart. "Save it for the authorities," I said, turning to leave. As we drove home, my daughter turned to me, her eyes brimming with tears. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I had no idea they were like that. Can you ever forgive me?" I reached over and squeezed her hand. "Sweetheart, there's nothing to forgive. If anything, I should thank you. You've helped me uncover some serious issues in my company." As we pulled into our driveway, I felt a mix of emotions, relief that the truth was out, pride in my daughter, and determination to set things right at my company. In the days following that disastrous dinner, I threw myself into action. I initiated a thorough investigation at my company, working closely with our internal audit team and external investigators. It didn't take long for the truth to come to light. The groom's father's boasts weren't just drunken ramblings, they were confessions of real, extensive fraud. The evidence was damning: falsified records, misappropriated funds, and a long list of clients he'd redirected to his personal schemes. I sat in my office, staring at the final report, a mix of anger and disappointment washing over me. How long would this have continued if not for that chance encounter? "What do you want to do, Ms. Audrey?" my head of legal asked. I took a deep breath. "File every possible lawsuit. And contact the authorities. He needs to face the consequences of his actions." The legal battles were intense, but we won every single one. The groom's father was forced to pay substantial damages and compensation. As for his position in the company, well, that was an easy decision. I called him into my office personally. The arrogant man I'd met at dinner was gone, replaced by a pale, trembling shadow. "You're fired," I said simply. "And don't expect a recommendation. In fact, I'll make sure every firm in this industry knows exactly what kind of person you are." Meanwhile, my daughter was dealing with her own fallout. Her ex-fiancé tried to crawl back, all apologies and promises. "Please," he begged over the phone. "I didn't know. We can start over." I overheard her response, fierce and final: "Never contact me again." The sound of her blocking his number was music to my ears. As the dust settled, I made good on my earlier decision. I signed over the deed to my large house to my daughter. "Mom, I can't accept this," she protested. I smiled, squeezing her hand. "You can, and you will. Think of it as a fresh start." As for me, I moved into my small, renovated house full-time. After all the drama, the simplicity was a balm to my soul. I spent my days tending to my garden, volunteering at local charities, and occasionally checking in on the company to make sure everything was running smoothly. One sunny afternoon, as I sat on my porch swing, sipping lemonade and watching the sunset, my daughter dropped by. "How are you doing, Mom?" she asked, settling beside me. I smiled, feeling a contentment I hadn't experienced in years. "I'm doing great, sweetheart. Really great." As we sat there, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple, I reflected on our journey. From struggling single mother to wealthy businesswoman, from heartbreak to healing. It hadn't been an easy road, but sitting here now, I wouldn't change a thing. Life had thrown its curveballs, but we'd come out stronger. And now, in this small house filled with love and memories, I'd found something far more valuable than any fortune: true happiness. I've always been a bit of a loner, even as a kid. The name's Veronica, and I've got a knack for keeping myself busy. Don't get me wrong, I'm not antisocial or anything. I just prefer my own company most of the time. My mom, bless her heart, recognized my independent streak early on. Instead of trying to change me, she channeled it into something productive. She introduced me to the world of cooking when I was barely tall enough to reach the kitchen counter. I soaked it all up like a sponge. Mom didn't just teach me recipes, she taught me to understand food. We'd go to cafes and restaurants all over town, and she'd break down each dish for me. As I grew older, my fascination with food only intensified. I started reading articles by famous restaurant critics, realizing that food was more than just taste and texture. It was about presentation, ambience, the whole package. One day, I turned to Mom and said, "I want to write about food." She looked at me, a hint of pride in her eyes. "Then you better learn everything there is to know about it, kiddo." And that's exactly what I did. I enrolled in a culinary institute, determined to become a master of the culinary arts. After graduating, I didn't stop there. I took journalism courses, honing my writing skills. I wanted to paint pictures with words, to make people taste the food through my descriptions. My first gig as a restaurant critic was for a small local paper. I wrote about a tiny Italian place, describing the way the homemade pasta melted in my mouth and how the rich aroma of garlic and basil transported me straight to a Tuscan kitchen. To my surprise, people loved it. My editor called me the next day. "Kid, you've got a gift," he said. "Keep this up, and you'll go far." And just like that, I found my calling. I bounced from newspaper to magazine, building a reputation for honest, witty reviews. But the real game changer came when I started my own social media pages. Suddenly, I wasn't just writing for publications. I was connecting directly with food lovers all over the world. My followers grew, hanging on my every word about the latest food trends and hidden gem restaurants. It was just another Tuesday evening. I'd settled into a cozy corner table at the Rustic Spoon, a new farm-to-table joint I was reviewing. As I jotted down notes about the ambience, an elderly couple at the next table caught my eye. The woman was peering at me intently, whispering to her husband. I offered a polite smile, used to being recognized, and turned back to my notepad. "Excuse me," the woman's voice was warm, tinged with excitement. "You're Veronica Miller, aren't you? The food critic?" I nodded. "That's me. Nice to meet you." "Oh, I'm such a fan," she gushed. "I follow all your posts. Would you like to join us for dinner?" I hesitated. Normally, I preferred to dine alone when working. But something about the couple's genuine enthusiasm made me reconsider. As I settled into their table, the woman introduced herself as Martha, her husband as George. "And this is our son, Jack," she added, gesturing to a young man I hadn't noticed before. Jack looked up from his phone, his eyes meeting mine. "Hey," he said, a lopsided grin spreading across his face. "Nice to meet you." We fell into easy conversation. Martha and George were eager to hear about my recent travels, while Jack chimed in with witty comments that had me laughing despite myself. As the evening wore on, I found myself enjoying their company more than I'd expected. Jack, in particular, was easy to talk to. We discovered a shared love for obscure indie films and terrible puns. When it was time to leave, Jack hesitated. "Hey, would it be okay if I got your number? You know, in case I need restaurant recommendations or something." I felt a flutter in my stomach that had nothing to do with the meal I'd just eaten. "Sure," I heard myself say. "For restaurant recommendations." We started texting that very night. At first, it was just about food and restaurants. But soon, we were talking about everything and anything. Our chats became the highlight of my day. A month later, Jack asked me out on a proper date. I said yes without hesitation. Our first date was at a quirky little bistro I'd been meaning to try. As we sat across from each other, I realized how comfortable I felt with him. There was none of the awkwardness I'd come to expect from first dates. A year after we met, Jack proposed. It wasn't a grand, flashy affair, he knew that wasn't my style. Instead, he cooked me dinner, a valiant effort that ended with slightly charred steak and lumpy mashed potatoes, and asked me to marry him over dessert. How could I say no to that? We moved into my apartment after the wedding. We decided to be practical about our finances, creating a joint account for shared expenses. I contributed more, given my higher income, but we both felt it was fair. Living together revealed new sides of Jack. He had a habit of leaving dishes in the sink and his clothes strewn about. His toothpaste tube was perpetually uncapped, and coffee mugs multiplied on every surface. I bit my tongue, reminding myself that I wasn't perfect either. It's just an adjustment period, I told myself. We'll find our rhythm. And slowly, we did. Jack made an effort to tidy up more, and I learned to relax my standards a bit. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. 6 months later, it was time for our first vacation together. As we stood in the airport, luggage in tow, I felt a surge of excitement. I turned to Jack, ready to share my joy, when I noticed his gaze fixed on something behind me. I spun around to see Martha and George approaching us, beaming widely. They carried only small carry-on bags, looking as if they were embarking on a day trip rather than a week-long vacation. "Surprise!" Martha exclaimed, pulling Jack into a hug. "We couldn't let you two lovebirds have all the fun, could we?" I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't part of the plan. I looked at Jack, hoping for some explanation, but he avoided my gaze. "It's, kind of a family tradition," he mumbled. "We always vacation together." I forced a smile, trying to mask my disappointment and frustration. "How nice," I managed to say. "But don't you need more luggage for a week-long trip?" George waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, we'll just pick up what we need there. No point in lugging around heavy suitcases, right?" The first few days of our vacation were a whirlwind. I focused on the positives, the beautiful scenery, the interesting flavor combinations I discovered, the warm hospitality of the locals. But as the days wore on, I couldn't help but notice how freely Martha and George spent money. They shopped like there was no tomorrow, ate at the fanciest places, and never seemed to worry about the bill. One evening, as we sat in yet another overpriced restaurant, I couldn't contain my curiosity any longer. I leaned towards Jack and whispered, "How can your parents afford all this? They're retired, aren't they?" Jack shifted uncomfortably in his seat. They're good with money," he mumbled, suddenly very interested in the menu. I wanted to press further, but Martha chose that moment to launch into a story about her bridge club, effectively ending our private conversation. As our vacation drew to a close, I found myself looking forward to returning home. The day after we returned, I decided to check our joint account, curious to see how much we'd spent. As I logged in, my eyes widened in shock. The balance was much lower than I'd expected, alarmingly so. "Jack, can you come here for a minute?" I called out, my voice tight. I turned the screen towards him. "Care to explain this?" Jack's face paled as he looked at the numbers. "I might have used our account to cover some of Mom and Dad's expenses," he admitted quietly. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the anger bubbling up inside me. "Jack, that was our money. Money that I mostly contributed. You should have discussed this with me first." I know, he said, reaching for my hand. "I'm sorry, Ronnie. It won't happen again, I promise." A month passed, and life slowly returned to normal. Jack kept his word and didn't touch our joint account without discussing it with me first. I tried to put the vacation incident behind us, focusing instead on my work and our life together. One crisp autumn evening, Jack came home with a spark of excitement in his eyes. "Hey, Ronnie," he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind as I stood at the kitchen counter, prepping vegetables for dinner. "I've got an idea. How about we go on an overnight picnic this weekend? Just the two of us, a rented motorhome, and the great outdoors. What do you say?" The idea was appealing. We spent the next few days preparing for our mini-adventure. I packed a cooler full of gourmet sandwiches, homemade potato salad, and a bottle of wine. Jack handled the logistics, renting a compact motorhome and mapping out our route. We arrived at the campsite by mid-afternoon. The area was beautiful, surrounded by towering pines and a crystal-clear lake. Jack maneuvered the motorhome into our assigned spot, and we stepped out to enjoy the fresh air. That's when I saw it. A familiar car pulling into the spot next to ours. Martha and George emerged from the car, waving enthusiastically. Surprise! Martha called out. We thought we'd join you for your little getaway. I turned to Jack, hoping to see shock on his face that matched my own. Instead, he looked sheepish, avoiding my gaze. Jack, I said, my voice low and controlled. Did you tell them about our trip? Before Jack could respond, Martha bustled over, pulling me into a tight hug. Oh, isn't this exciting? A family camping trip. I forced a smile, noticing that once again, they had arrived without any supplies. No tent, no food, not even a change of clothes. As the evening wore on, it became clear that our romantic getaway had turned into a family ordeal. Martha and George dominated the conversation, regaling us with stories of their past camping adventures. They helped themselves to our food and wine, leaving little for Jack and me. When it came time to sleep, another problem arose. Our compact motorhome wasn't designed for 4 adults. And Jack turned to his mother. You and Dad take the bedroom. Ronnie and I will manage in the car. And so, instead of enjoying a cozy night in our rented motorhome, I found myself uncomfortably curled up in the backseat of our car, with Jack snoring softly in the front. The next morning, bleary-eyed and stiff from our awkward sleeping arrangements, I suggested to Jack that we cut our trip short. The drive home was tense, filled with awkward small talk and long stretches of silence. As soon as we arrived back at our apartment, Jack's parents bid us a cheerful goodbye, seemingly oblivious to the strain their presence had caused. Once they were gone, I turned to Jack. We need to talk about this, I said firmly. He nodded, looking resigned. I know. I'm sorry, Ronnie. I should have told you they were coming. It's not just about that, I sighed. It's about boundaries, Jack. Your parents can't keep barging into our lives like this. We need to set some ground rules. Jack nodded slowly. You're right, I'll talk to them. A couple of days after our return, I was in the kitchen testing a new recipe when the doorbell rang. To my surprise, Martha and George were standing there, bright smiles on their faces as if the vacation fiasco had never happened. Veronica, dear, Martha exclaimed, giving me a quick hug as they bustled in. We need your expertise. We were wondering if you could tell us which restaurants in the city have the most delicious dishes? Well, I said, caught off guard by the question. There are quite a few excellent places. The French bistro downtown, Le Petit Canard, is fantastic. And Sakura Sushi on 5th Avenue has some of the best sushi I've ever tasted. Why do you ask? Martha's eyes gleamed with excitement. Oh, we thought we'd keep an eye out for any open events at these restaurants. You know, so we can go and eat for free. I turned to Jack, who had just walked into the room, hoping he'd back me up. But he just shrugged and said, Come on, Ronnie. You've got to accept my parents as they are. No use trying to change them. I was speechless. This was crossing a line, wasn't it? But before I could formulate a response, Martha and George had thanked me profusely and left, chattering excitedly about their plans to score free meals. A few days later, I was preparing for a review of a new upscale Italian restaurant, Bella Notte. As usual, I posted the details of my visit on my social media page, letting my followers know when and where they could expect my next review. The evening of the review arrived, and I settled into my table at Bella Notte, notebook in hand, ready to experience and evaluate the menu. I had just opened the wine list when I heard a familiar voice. Well, hello there. I looked up to see Martha and George, beaming at me as they sat down at my table without invitation. My heart sank. Martha picked up a menu and announced loudly, I'm Veronica's mother-in-law, you know. We're here to enjoy the free meal with her. I felt my face grow hot with embarrassment. Martha, I hissed, please lower your voice. I'm here to work. You can't just show up like this. But Martha wasn't listening. She raised her voice even more. Oh, don't be silly, dear. Everyone knows you food critics eat for free. Why shouldn't your family enjoy the perks too? We have every right to be here. I could feel the eyes of nearby diners on us. The head waiter was approaching our table, a concerned look on his face. This was quickly spiraling out of control. "Martha, George," I said, my voice low but firm. "I'm giving you one last warning. If you don't leave right now, I will have no choice but to call security. You are interfering with my work and causing a scene." Martha's face contorted with indignation. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Well, I never," she exclaimed. "Is this how you treat family, Veronica?" As she gathered her purse, she turned to me one last time, her voice dripping with disappointment. "You know, I'm beginning to think I made a terrible mistake. I'm the one who told Jack to marry you. I followed your Facebook page, and I thought, now there's a girl who could help us enjoy the finer things in life. I thought you'd help us eat at fancy restaurants for free, maybe even support us a little. But clearly, I was wrong. If this is how you treat family, well, we're no longer interested in being part of yours." With that parting shot, Martha stormed out of the restaurant, George trailing behind her. The silence that followed was deafening. My hands shaking, I reached for my phone and dialed Jack's number. He picked up on the third ring. "Jack," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "is it true? Did your mother really push you to marry me because she thought I'd provide for them?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Jack sighed. "Yes," he admitted. "Mom saw your success and thought, well, you know how she is. She insisted you'd be perfect for me, for us." I felt as if the floor had dropped out from under me. I hung up and turned to the head waiter, who had been hovering nearby. "I'm so sorry for the disturbance," I said. "I won't be able to complete my review tonight. Please extend my apologies to the chef." As I gathered my things, I pulled out my phone once more and quickly typed out an apology to my followers, explaining that due to unforeseen circumstances, my review of Bella Nate would be postponed. The drive home was a blur. My mind was reeling, trying to process everything that had happened. When I walked through our apartment door, Jack was waiting for me, his face etched with worry. "Ronnie," he started, but I held up a hand, silencing him. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "All this time, was I just a meal ticket to your family?" Jack's face crumpled. He reached for my hand, and this time I didn't pull away. "No, Ronnie, no. I mean, yes, that's how it started with my mom's idea, but I fell in love with you. The real you. Not your job or your connections, just you." I sank onto the couch, suddenly feeling exhausted. He sat next to me, his eyes pleading. "I know I've made mistakes. I should have set boundaries with my parents long ago. But Ronnie, I love you. I want to make this work. Can we try to fix this?" I looked at him, really looked at him. Despite everything, I knew I loved him too. As we sat there on the couch, hands intertwined, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could salvage this mess and come out stronger on the other side. The next couple of months passed in relative peace. Jack made efforts to set boundaries with his parents, and I threw myself into my work, trying to rebuild the trust in our relationship. Then came the moment I'd been working towards for years. My cookbook was published. It was more successful than I could have ever imagined. Major newspapers and magazines praised it, and it quickly became a bestseller on all the major online retail sites. One evening, as I was scrolling through yet another glowing review, Jack came home with a surprise. "Let's celebrate your success," he said, his eyes twinkling with excitement. "I've planned a trip to that charming city you've always wanted to visit. It's got everything you love, amazing restaurants, historical sites, beautiful nature, and I've booked us into that boutique hotel you've been eyeing." I hesitated for a moment, then asked the question that had been nagging at me. "It's just us, right? Your parents aren't coming?" Jack looked me in the eye. "I promise, Ronnie, it's just us. No parents, no surprises." The day of our trip arrived, and we made our way to the train station, luggage in tow. As we approached the platform, I felt my heart sink. There, waving enthusiastically, were Martha and George. I turned to Jack, hoping against hope that this was some cruel coincidence. But the guilty look on his face told me everything I needed to know. "I'm sorry," he muttered, avoiding my gaze. I couldn't not invite them. Mom found out about the trip and... In that moment, something inside me broke. All the promises, all the efforts of the past months, they meant nothing. But I plastered on a smile as Martha and George approached. I noticed they only had a small purse between them. "No luggage?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Martha waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't worry about that, dear. You'll take care of everything, won't you? After all, we're celebrating your success." As the announcement for boarding came over the loudspeaker, we made our way onto the train. As everyone settled into their seats, I stood up. "I'm just going to use the restroom before we depart," I said, grabbing my purse that contained my phone and documents. I stepped off the train, the cool air of the platform hitting my face. I stood there, watching as the train's doors closed, as the whistle blew, as it slowly began to pull away from the station. My phone buzzed in my purse, startling me out of my reverie. Jack's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered. "Ronnie, where are you?" Jack's panicked voice came through. "We're no longer on the same path, Jack," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm divorcing you." I hung up, without waiting for his answer. My hand shook slightly as I opened my banking app and blocked Jack's access to our joint account. Barely a minute passed before my phone rang again. This time, it was Martha. I held the phone away from my ear as she hurled insults and threats, demanding I pay for their trip and compensate them for emotional distress. When she finally paused for breath, I spoke calmly. "Martha, I'm not afraid of your threats or your comments. If you post any slanderous statements, I won't hesitate to take legal action." I blocked her number, then Jack's, and finally George's, for good measure. Taking a deep breath, I called a cab and headed home. The weekend passed in a blur of emotions and practicality. I packed Jack's belongings, contacted a lawyer, and drafted divorce papers. By Monday morning, I felt exhausted but resolute. The sound of a key in the lock made me tense. Jack walked in, looking disheveled and desperate. "Ronnie, please," he began, moving towards me with open arms. I stepped back, gesturing to the suitcases by the door. "Your things are packed. It's time for you to leave." His face crumpled. "You can't mean that. Look, I've learned my lesson. I had a huge fight with my parents on the trip. I told them I wouldn't pay for them anymore. I'm not even speaking to them now. Please, give me another chance." I shook my head, handing him the divorce papers. "It's too late, Jack. This isn't just about your parents. It's about trust, respect, and the life I want to live. We want different things, and that's okay, but I can't do this anymore." After a long moment, he nodded, shoulders slumping in defeat. He picked up his suitcases and walked out, closing the door behind him with a final click. The following weeks were challenging but liberating. The divorce proceedings went smoothly, thanks to my meticulous documentation and Jack's apparent resignation. I threw myself into my work, finding solace in the kitchen and my writing. As the dust settled, I found myself alone again, but it wasn't the loneliness I had feared. I rediscovered the joy in small pleasures, experimenting with new recipes, enjoying quiet evenings with a good book, and connecting with my followers without the shadow of familial expectations. One evening, as I sat on my balcony, sipping a glass of wine and looking out over the city, I couldn't help but smile. Life hadn't turned out as I'd planned, but perhaps it had turned out exactly as it should. I was Veronica again, food critic, author, and most importantly, mistress of my own destiny. My name's Kristen, and I just turned 17 when everything started to fall apart. Growing up, I had what I thought was a pretty normal family. There was me, my little brother who's 10 years younger than me, and our parents. Dad worked as a manager in Mom's family business, a company that my grandfather had built from scratch. It all started with a chain of coffee shops, which eventually grew into this big deal exclusive coffee selling company. Grandpa was a real go-getter, you know? But when he decided to retire, he didn't just sell off the business or let it die. No, he offered it to Mom. I remember overhearing that conversation. Mom's voice was clear as day. "I'm happy being a housewife. Let John handle it." And that was that. Dad took over, and life went on. It wasn't until I hit my teens that I started noticing the cracks in our family's foundation. Mom and Dad began arguing more and more. Mom picked at every little thing Dad did or didn't do. It was like she was trying to provoke him, push him to his limits. And then, when he'd finally snap and raise his voice, she'd play the victim. "See how he treats me," she'd sob to anyone who would listen. "I'm just trying to keep this family together, and he yells at me." I didn't know what to think. I loved both my parents, but watching them tear each other apart was unbearable. My brother was too young to really understand what was happening, but I could see the confusion and fear in his eyes whenever Mom and Dad would go at it. One night, things came to a head. I was in my room, trying to drown out their latest argument with music, when I heard a crash. My heart racing, I ran downstairs to find a scene that would change everything. Mom was on the floor, Dad standing over her. She was screaming, "He hit me." Dad looked desperate. I didn't touch her, Kristen. She fell, I was trying to help her up. But Mom was already on the phone, calling the police. I stood there, frozen, not knowing who to believe or what to do. In that moment, I felt like my whole world was collapsing around me. The night Dad was taken away by the police is etched into my memory. I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with questions. What really happened? Was Dad capable of hitting Mom? Why would Mom lie if he didn't? The next few days were a blur. Dad was released without charges, and Mom, in a show of what she called generosity, dropped the complaint. But the damage was done. The tension in our house was unbearable. Mom was relentless, painting Dad as this monster who'd been tormenting her for years. "He's always had a temper," she'd whisper to me when Dad wasn't around. "I've been protecting you and Tommy from the worst of it." The divorce happened faster than I could process. One day, Dad was packing a single suitcase, looking lost in his own home. "I'm sorry, kids," he said, his voice breaking. "I'll make this right, I promise." But how could he? Mom got everything in the divorce, the house, the car, even Dad's position in the company. He was left with nothing. After Dad left, Mom sat Tommy and me down for a family meeting. "Things will be different now," she said, smiling in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "Your father can't hurt us anymore. We're safe." Tommy, young and confused, asked, "But when is Dad coming home?" Mom's face hardened for a split second before she forced another smile. "Oh, sweetie, Dad needs some time to work on himself. But we'll be just fine without him." I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, but every time I tried to question Mom's version of events, she'd shut me down. "You're too young to understand, Kristen," she'd say dismissively. "Adult relationships are complicated." Then, barely 2 months after the divorce, Mom dropped another bombshell. "Kids, I have wonderful news," she announced one evening. "I'm getting married." I was stunned. "Married? But, it's only been 2 months since." "I know it seems fast," Mom interrupted. "But when you find true love, you just know. Robert and I, it was love at first sight." I felt sick. How could she move on so quickly? What about Dad? What about us? Robert, my new stepfather, moved in shortly after. He was, okay, I guess. He didn't pay much attention to me, but he and Tommy seemed to hit it off. I'd hear them laughing together, playing video games, and it made me feel even more isolated. Meanwhile, Mom took over the family company, bringing Robert into work alongside her. They were always talking about business, making plans, while Tommy and I faded into the background. I felt lost, caught between the memory of what our family used to be and this new reality I couldn't quite accept. As I watched Mom and Robert coo over each other at the dinner table, with Tommy happily chattering away, I couldn't help but wonder, where do I fit in now? And what really happened between Mom and Dad? Just when I thought things couldn't get any more complicated, Mom dropped another bombshell on us. She and Robert had decided to move the company's head office to another city, supposedly more promising for business. They were planning to transfer all the capital to this new subsidiary. At first, I didn't think much of it. Sure, moving would suck, but at least we'd be together as a family, right? Wrong. One evening, as I was doing homework in my room, Mom knocked on my door. "Kristen, honey, you know Robert and I are moving for work." "Yeah, when do we leave?" I asked, already mentally packing my room. Mom's face twisted into an expression I couldn't quite read. "That's the thing, sweetie. The new house, it's not very big. And with you almost finishing high school, we thought it might be better if you stayed here." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "Stay here? But what about Tommy?" "Tommy's younger, he needs us more," Mom said quickly. "Besides, you wouldn't want to change schools right before your exams, would you? We think it's best if you stay with your grandfather." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were leaving me behind? "But Mom, I want to be with you and Tommy. Can't we find a bigger place?" Mom's voice turned stern. "Kristen, this has already been decided. It's for the best, trust me." And just like that, my world turned upside down again. Within weeks, Mom, Robert, and Tommy were gone, and I was moving in with Grandpa. Don't get me wrong, Grandpa's great, but I felt abandoned, cast aside like I didn't fit into their new perfect family. My 18th birthday rolled around soon after. I hoped, foolishly perhaps, that Mom and Robert would come back for it. But no, they were too busy with work to make it. Grandpa, bless him, threw me a party and let me invite my friends. It wasn't the same, but I appreciated his effort. The morning after my birthday, Grandpa called me into his home office. He had this serious look on his face as he handed me a small folder. "Happy birthday, Kristen," he said, a twinkle in his eye. "This is my gift to you, now that you're of age." Confused, I opened the folder and started reading the documents inside. My jaw dropped as I realized what I was holding. "Grandpa, this is..." He nodded, smiling. "That's right, kiddo. I'm giving you the company." I was speechless. Me? Running a whole company? At 18? "But Grandpa, I don't know the first thing about running a business." He chuckled. "You've got potential, Kristen, I see it in you. You'll learn, and I know you'll do great things." Then his face turned serious again. "There's one more thing. I think you should reconcile with your father. Take him on as a consultant. He knows the business, and, well, I think there are some things you need to hear from him." I hesitated. After everything Mom had said about Dad, I wasn't sure I wanted to see him. But Grandpa had never steered me wrong before. I met Dad at a small cafe downtown, my stomach in knots. As I approached our table, I saw him stand up, a hesitant smile on his face. He looked older, more worn down than I remembered. "Kristen," he said, his voice warm but cautious. "I understand you're angry. Your mother probably told you a lot of things about me." "Yeah, she did," I snapped. "How you were abusive, how you hit her." "How could you, Dad?" He took a deep breath. "Kristen, what your mother told you, it's not true. I need you to listen to what really happened." For the next hour, Dad laid out a story that shook me to my core. He explained how Mom had deliberately provoked him, pushing his buttons until he was at his wit's end. The night I saw her on the floor, she had staged the whole thing. "Your mother took the police statement back in exchange for me not claiming any property in the divorce," Dad said, his voice heavy with pain. "She set me up, Kristen. She wanted everything, and she got it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But why would Mom do that? And why didn't you fight back? Dad reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Because of this, he said, pressing play on an audio file. Mom's voice filled the air between us, cold and calculating. John, here's the deal. You leave quietly, sign over everything to me, and I'll drop the charges. Fight me on this, and I'll make sure everyone believes you're an abuser. Your choice. I felt sick. Dad, why didn't you use this in court? You could have proved your innocence. He shook his head sadly. It wouldn't have changed the outcome, Kristen. Your mother had made up her mind. But more importantly, I didn't want to put you through any more pain. You were already dealing with so much. In your teenage years, you need support, not more family drama. Tears welled up in my eyes. Everything I thought I knew was a lie. I'm so sorry, Dad. I should have known, should have trusted you. Dad reached across the table and squeezed my hand. It's okay, sweetheart. I'm sorry too. I know I worked too much when you were younger. I should have been there more. We sat in silence for a moment, both processing the weight of everything that had been said. Then, wiping my eyes, I remembered why I had originally reached out. Dad, there's something else I need to tell you, I said, my voice shaky but determined. Grandpa, he gave me the company. For my 18th birthday. Dad's eyes widened in surprise, then crinkled with pride. Kristen, that's incredible. Your grandfather always had a good eye for potential. He must see great things in you. I felt a warmth spread through my chest at his words. But Dad, I don't know the first thing about running a company. I need help. Without hesitation, Dad smiled. I'd be honored to help you, free of charge. I'll guide you through everything you need to know. As we continued talking, making plans for the future, I felt a mix of emotions. Anger at Mom for her deception, sadness for what our family had lost, but also hope. Hope that with Dad's help and Grandpa's faith in me, maybe I could turn this unexpected gift into something amazing. The months flew by as I settled into my new life with Grandpa. Before I knew it, I was donning a cap and gown, graduating high school with honors. It felt surreal, walking across that stage without Mom, Robert, or Tommy in the audience. But Grandpa's proud face and Dad's supportive presence made up for it. With graduation behind me, I threw myself into preparing for college. Thanks to my grades and extracurricular activities, I managed to secure a full scholarship. I decided to major in business management. After all, I had a company to run now. The day I got my acceptance letter, Grandpa insisted on throwing a little celebration. Just the two of us, some cake, and a toast to the future. We were in the middle of our second slice when the doorbell rang. Grandpa frowned. Were you expecting anyone? I shook my head, equally confused. When Grandpa opened the door, I nearly dropped my plate. There stood Mom and Robert, looking as if they owned the place. Mom barely glanced at me. Her eyes were fixed on Grandpa, her expression stormy. Dad, we need to talk. Now. Without waiting for an invitation, she strode into the living room, Robert trailing behind her. I watched, stunned, as she rounded on Grandpa. Why can't I access the company accounts? She demanded. And who gave you the right to block the capital transfer to our new subsidiary? Grandpa stood his ground, his voice calm but firm. Sarah, the company no longer belongs to you. It's Kristen's now. Mom's jaw dropped. For a moment, she looked like a fish out of water. Then her eyes narrowed, darting between Grandpa and me. What do you mean, it's Kristen's? She hissed. Exactly what I said, Grandpa replied. I gave Kristen the company for her 18th birthday. All decisions about its future and finances are hers to make now. The shock on Mom's face quickly gave way to a simpering smile as she turned to me. Kristen, sweetie, I've missed you so much. Why don't you come live with us? We've settled in so well in the new city. I blinked, taken aback by her sudden change in demeanor. We have a lovely house, she continued, her voice honey-sweet. There's a big bedroom just for you, with plenty of space for a desk and computer. You could study and work from home. Wouldn't that be nice? I felt a twinge in my chest. Part of me, the part that still longed for my mom's approval, wanted to say yes. But then I thought of everything I'd learned, everything I'd built here. Thanks, Mom, but no, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. I'm happy here. I have my friends, my life, and Grandpa. Besides, I start college soon. The tension in the room was palpable as I stood my ground against Mom's manipulations. Her sweet demeanor quickly soured when she realized I wasn't going to be swayed. Fine, she snapped, her voice losing its sugary coating. If you won't come to us, we'll move back here. We can all live in our old house, just like before. Wouldn't that be nice, Kristen? I shook my head, feeling a strange mix of sadness and determination. No, Mom, that's not going to happen either. I could see the anger building in her eyes, her facade crumbling rapidly. It was now or never. Mom, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart, I want you to tell me the truth. What really happened between you and Dad? Why did you really get divorced? For a split second, confusion flashed across Mom's face. Then, as if on cue, tears welled up in her eyes. Oh, Kristen, she sobbed. Your father, he was so cruel. He insulted me, he even hit me. I had to leave to protect myself, to protect you and Tommy. I felt a surge of anger at her lies. Stop it, Mom. I know what really happened. I know you framed Dad. You set him up so you could divorce him and take everything for yourself. The tears vanished from Mom's eyes in an instant, replaced by a cold fury I'd never seen before. How dare you, she hissed. You ungrateful child. You have no right to meddle in my personal life. She turned to Grandpa, her voice rising. Everything here belongs to me. I decide who lives where and who gets what. Then she rounded on me again. You will come home right now, Kristen, and you will hand over that company to me where it belongs. I stood there, shocked by the venom in her voice, when Grandpa stepped forward. His face was a storm of disappointment and anger. That's enough, Sarah, he said, his voice low but powerful. You seem to have forgotten a few important details. This property, including your old house, belongs to me, not you. And the company? That now belongs to Kristen. I gave it to her, and it's hers to do with as she sees fit. Mom's face went pale, then red with rage. She opened her mouth to argue, but Grandpa cut her off. I've heard enough, he said firmly. I'm ashamed of you, Sarah. I raised you better than this. Now, I think it's time for you and Robert to leave. You can't kick us out, Mom shrieked. I'm your daughter. Grandpa's expression was stone. And Kristen is my granddaughter. A granddaughter who has shown more integrity and strength in the past few months than you have in years. Now, leave, both of you. I watched, a mix of emotions swirling inside me, as Grandpa ushered Mom and Robert to the door. Mom's face was a mask of fury and disbelief as the door closed behind them. As the sound of their car engine faded away, I sank onto the couch, feeling drained. Grandpa sat beside me, putting a comforting arm around my shoulders. As we sat there in silence, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. The confrontation with Mom had been explosive, but somehow, I knew it wasn't over. This was just the beginning of a new chapter in our complicated family saga. The morning after Mom and Robert's dramatic exit, I woke to the sound of hushed voices downstairs. Curiosity getting the better of me, I crept down to find Grandpa and Dad in deep conversation in the study. Kristen, Dad said, noticing me first. Come in, sweetheart. We were just talking about you and Tommy. I entered the room, my confusion evident. What about Tommy? Grandpa cleared his throat. I've asked your father if he'd be willing to seek custody of Tommy. My eyes widened. Really? But, how? Dad nodded, a mix of determination and hope in his eyes. Your grandfather thinks we have a strong case, especially with what he's discovered. Grandpa reached for a thick folder on his desk. "Kristen, sit down. There's something you need to see." With trembling hands, I opened the folder. Inside was a detailed report from a private investigator. As I read, I felt my world tilt on its axis once again. "Mom was cheating on you?" I looked at Dad, horrified. "With Robert? For years?" Dad nodded grimly. "It seems so." Grandpa pointed to several documents. Hotel receipts, gift records, old text messages. "Your mother and Robert had been carrying on an affair long before the divorce." "But how did the investigator get all this information?" I asked, bewildered. Grandpa's eyes narrowed. "Robert made a crucial mistake. He threw away his old phone when he bought a new one. Our investigator managed to recover it, and it was a goldmine of information." I felt sick. But why all the theatrics with the divorce then? Why accuse Dad of abuse? "It was Robert's idea," Grandpa explained, his voice heavy. "According to their messages on that old phone, he suggested she frame your father for domestic violence. It was all a ploy to ensure she got everything in the divorce." Tears stung my eyes. But Grandpa wasn't finished. "There's more," he said, turning to another section of the report. "That same phone revealed Robert's true nature. He's not who he claims to be. He's a con man, Kristen. The phone had messages with other women. He targets wealthy women, marries them, and then disappears with their money." The pieces suddenly fell into place. "That's why he was so keen on moving the company and transferring all the capital," I gasped. "He was planning to steal it all along." Grandpa nodded gravely. "Exactly. And there's one more thing you should know. I met with your mother and showed her all this evidence. But she refused to believe it. She's in deep denial about Robert's true nature and his intentions." I sat back, my mind reeling. "What do we do now?" "We fight," Dad said firmly. "For Tommy, for the company, for the truth." Grandpa nodded in agreement. "I've already called my lawyer. We're going to file for custody of Tommy and take steps to protect the company's assets." The next few months were a whirlwind of legal battles and emotional turmoil. Dad fought tirelessly for custody of Tommy. I stood by them every step of the way, determined to bring my little brother home. The courtroom was tense as Mom tried to paint Dad as a monster, spinning tales of abuse and neglect. But her lies crumbled in the face of the mountain of evidence we had gathered. The judge listened intently as our lawyer presented the detective's findings. The recovered phone messages, the proof of Mom's affair, and the elaborate scheme she and Robert had concocted to frame Dad. I'll never forget the look on Mom's face when the judge awarded full custody to Dad. It was a mix of shock, anger, and something else, perhaps the first flicker of realization that her carefully constructed world was falling apart. The final blow came shortly after. Robert, upon learning that Mom was now left without the company, without a home, and saddled with child support payments, showed his true colors. He disappeared overnight, running off with another woman and leaving Mom with nothing but the consequences of her actions. In a desperate move, Mom tried to reconcile with Dad. I was there when she came to our old house, our home once again, tears streaming down her face as she begged for forgiveness. But Dad stood firm. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said, his voice steady. "But too much has happened. I can't trust you again. Please leave." As the door closed on Mom's pleading face, I felt a chapter of our lives ending. It was painful, but also strangely freeing. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. I threw myself into my college studies, determined to learn everything I could about business management. Between classes, I'd pore over company reports with Dad, soaking up his knowledge and experience. He agreed to run the company until I graduated, giving me time to learn the ropes without the pressure of full responsibility. Tommy, still too young to fully understand everything that had happened, thrived under Dad's care. It was heartwarming to see them rebuild their relationship, to watch Tommy's eyes light up when Dad came home from work or when we all played board games together on Friday nights. We often visited Grandpa, who lived just a few blocks away. Those Sunday dinners became a cherished tradition. The four of us gathered around his big oak table, sharing stories and laughter. Grandpa would regale us with tales from his early days building the company, his eyes twinkling as he watched me soak up every detail. As I sit here now, in my childhood bedroom that once again feels like home, I can't help but marvel at how much has changed. The path that led us here was rocky and painful, full of betrayals and hard truths. But it also led to this, a family rebuilt, stronger and closer than ever before. I know there will be challenges ahead. Running a company is no small task, and the echoes of our family drama will likely linger for years to come. But I'm not afraid. With Dad, Tommy, and Grandpa by my side, I feel ready for whatever the future holds.